All right, so let us pick up with the problem of universals that we were talking about last time. Any questions to start off with about where we were? We were looking at whether truths that make apparent reference to abstract universals can be paraphrased wholly in terms of reference to concrete entities. And we found that there was some cases that appeared problematic for the concretist or nominalist philosopher who says we can translate all of these apparent references into concrete references. At first, things seemed to go well for the nominalist. He could say that redness is a color, can be rephrased as all red things are colored things, and that dragonhood is never exemplified, can be translated as there are never any dragons, that catness is exemplified by Garfield, can be translated simply as Garfield is a cat. But then when we looked at examples like honesty is a virtue, things got messier for the nominalist. And finally, an example like some shapes are never exemplified seemed really difficult for the nominalist to deal with without introducing some very suspicious terminology that seemed to bring in abstract entities or a very unparsimonious approach to the universe, like imagining the many worlds theory of possibility. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I just didn't catch this last class, but when you were talking about dragonness, specifically.
Dragonhood,
yeah. Yeah, dragonhood.
I mean, dragonness is okay, but it's just not sort of standard anymore.
Yeah, okay, so you said dragonhood is not exemplified, and then the...
Those are all called nominalizations, by the way. So when you nominalize a noun, you turn it into a name of from a concrete to an abstract. Yeah. So, but there are some, usually it's NESS, but then there are like, that's a suffix for nominalizing nouns into abstract, concrete nouns into abstract names. But some of them are irregular, like hood, like brotherhood and dragonhood. We wouldn't say dragonness or brotherness or something we'd say.
So when you said the nominalist would say that, therefore, would just say that, in order, you can paraphrase that as, there are never any dragons?
Well, if the claim was dragonhood is never exemplified.
Okay, it was never exemplified.
Well, that's one example. The other example is there are currently, dragonhood is currently unexemplified, and that would be there are currently no dragons. Yeah,
okay.
right.
I thought,
Okay.
I was just wondering, because I didn't know if you just, like, if it was, like, say, like if someone's going to nominalize, like, a false statement about dragons, does that mean that if you're going to, that the nominalist would then assume that there are never any of these, like, there are never any dragons? And that's what I was confused about.
Is it clarified now?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Yeah, so and then you have other, like, irregular endings, like ITY is an nominalizing suffix also, like unicornicity, the quality that all unicorns share, rather than unicornness or unicornhood, like cananinity, felininity, unicornicity, so triangularity. So you start out with an adjective or noun triangle, and you can turn it into an abstract name by adding the suffix. ITY, hood, ness.
So it becomes a verb then, right?
No, it's not a verb. No. A verb is like run or something.
Oh, okay. I was thinking of the ITY suffix as becoming a verb.
No, not a verb. There's an ILY suffix which turns verbs into adverbs, but I don't know, maybe it's like quick into quickly.
So we just talking about gerunds?
Hmm?
Like making one word that has one property into another property?
Well, you can turn one grammatical form into another by adding a certain suffix, in this case, to the original form. That's all I'm talking about. Like turn adjectives into names of abstractions by nominalizing them, which you do by adding a suffix like NESS or ITY or HOOD or whatever, right? So you turn dog into dogness. Right? So dog refers to concrete things, but dogness refers to abstract things. That's all I'm saying. Very simple. Yeah, so different theories then were proposed. A lot of these in the Middle Ages, when the problem of universals was like the hot topic of the time. So one view, which really wasn't held by anybody really in the Middle Ages, was Plato's view, because they very much followed Aristotle in the Middle Ages.
Anyone knows Aristotle?
This is extreme realism, which says that universals are eternal objects.
So does this mean like the idea of catness is an eternal idea?
It's an eternal entity. Yeah,
It's
it's an eternal like form or quality or something. Plato thought of it as a form, whatever that is, like a structure or pattern, essence or something. That all things of that type are modeled after or partake of that essence. So like the form of justice is something that any just thing represents or copies or resembles or something.
Gotcha.
That's what Plato thought, yeah.
So are these things universal because they can exist in propositions?
Why are they universal? Because they can be shared by many things.
Okay. I mean, are they eternal?
Eternal, yeah. They exist outside of space and time eternally, necessarily, unchangeably.
And they can't have causal relations?
They don't change, they don't evolve, they can't be moved, they can't be touched, they can't be smelled, right? But things in our world reflect them in some kind of way. Right. So if you have like an essence of justice, then any earthly act which is just reflects that essence of justice, according to Plato. And a lot of times it was held that you couldn't really get the pure form on the earthly plane. But like Diogenes, remember I talked about, he was this wandering around with a lamp saying, "I can't find an honest man." I'm looking around. So yeah, honesty itself is something that's reflected in life, but you never really get the pure thing. Or like a circle exists in geometry, but you never see like a perfect circle. They're all bumpy. Under a microscope, anything that's circular turns out to be very bumpy, right? Only roughly is circular, right? To a first approximation, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that was Plato's. Yeah, so universals are eternal objects. So this would say then that dogness is an eternal form. So even before dogs existed, there was the form of dogness. Maybe God looked at that form and then created dogs. Something like that. So in Latin, I like to always give you a little bit of the history here. This is described as the universals are prior to things, universalia ante rem, which means universals come before things.
Okay. So is this like almost playing into like the theology of like God made man
Yeah.
in his own image?
Yeah,
We could
sure.
relate to, like,
Yeah.
the image with form.
Definitely is tied up with Plato influenced Christianity a lot. Greek philosophy in general influenced the early theologians of the church. Universalia come ante rem. They're before. Ante means before. Rem are things. Universalia are universals. So universals are prior to things. Universals are eternal. Things are fleeting. And universals are the primary beings. And things in the world are more secondary. They derive their essence or quality from these abstract eternal qualities or forms. So that was a Platonic view. They say no one in the Middle Ages actually ever held that view, I don't think. Though Plato did.
So there's a juxtaposition between Plato's being in forms and then Aristotle's.
Yeah, Aristotle's, yeah. And they follow Aristotle much more in the Middle Ages. The closest they come was, there was some people called ultra-realists, but even they were sort of Aristotelians, broadly speaking, but they were more Platonic than others. One of them was William of Champeaux. William said that there's a single essence that is wholly present in each instance of a universal, so that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, for example, according to William of Champeaux, all have the very same essence of manhood. They literally have the same essence. So he was ridiculed for this because people argued that, well, what this show, if you're right, then Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are all the same man, and that seems wrong. They're different men, right? So how could they have exactly the very same essence? They may share some properties, but there's still some differentiating essence. So their entire essence can't be the same.
So the entire essence does not rest upon manhood, but again something.
This must be some other stuff,
Okay. There's like a higher essence that must be true.
higher, lower, whatever, something else that must apply to them to differentiate them. So their existence doesn't entirely depend just on the universal. Yeah.
So does, would the universals have to be manifested in order for them to?
Not for Plato.
Okay.
Yeah, for Plato, there could be unmanifested ones, like unicorn, unicornicity.
Can you just distinguish the difference between Aristotle and Plato?
Yeah, we're getting to him next. So.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, so, yeah, so you have this kind of view. Then you have moderate realism, that's Aristotle. So an example of somebody who held this was Duns Scotus in the Middle Ages. So this says universals are in things. So they're immanent, they're in the world. They're not outside of nature. They're in the things themselves. Catness is in cats. Universalia in rerum. Universals are in the things.
Is that rerum?
Yeah, R-E-R-U-M. It's like, this means things. So re is the operative root there. which we've encountered before, right? Like de re means of the things, as opposed to de dicto, which was of the propositions. Yeah.
You got rid of all the cats in the world, and in this system with the form of catness, would that just cease to exist?
Yeah.
If it's in the world?
Yeah.
So it's contingent upon something existing that has that
Yes.
universal.
Yeah. Has that quality or form. Yeah, whereas for Plato, there could be forms that are never found in the natural world, like maybe honesty or integrity. Right.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Right, so that's the moderate realism. And then you have conceptualism. For example, as held by William of Ockham. This is universals are in the intellect, universalia in intellectu. Universals are in the mind. So this views universals as ideas or concepts or mental images or something. So dogness could just be like our mental image of a dog or a concept of a dog.
So for William of Ockham, could someone be mistaken about a universal? Or is it purely like, or are they arbitrary? There's such a subjective, I guess.
Yeah, is it contingent on societal standards or the individual?
I guess there could be different versions of right of this view. You could have your individual concept and sort of the generally accepted concept. So, which one's better for the conceptualist? Right. It seems like you'd want to have some kind of idea of a generally accepted consensus concept. Otherwise, it's hard to see how you can communicate with
Right.
other people.
Schrodinger's box. It just reminds me of Schrodinger's box.
Yeah, but it seems like we do communicate, at least to some extent, right? It's difficult, but we do, so we must have some common ideas, and you would want to be able to talk about those, about the common things, in virtue of which we can communicate, because without any common ideas, we couldn't communicate at all. It'd be like trying to communicate with, like, a worm or something, right? His ideas are totally different than yours. Right? It's really difficult to communicate with a worm about anything, or for him to communicate with you. His things, right? Seems like you need a common basis to be able to set up like translation manual. Yeah. All right, so you have these. These are some of the main views. There was also what's called, how do I say, be called nominalism. Conceptualism can be regarded as a form of nominalism, but there's a stricter form of nominalism that was first put forward by Rosselin. Rosselin said that universals are that which is predicated of many, and what is predicated of many are sounds, which are corporeal objects, like air vibrations, so on. They didn't really have too many writing implements and paper during the Middle Ages. There was like one shelf of books, like, you know, like all of France or something, right? So they had very few manuscripts. So people mainly memorized things and communicated by word of mouth. So he tended to think of universals in terms of the spoken word rather than the written word. But for that reason, this form of nominalism would basically hold that that signs of some sort, whether verbal or inscribed, if you carry it over to writing, are the universals. So what's predicated of many is not an abstract catness, but rather the word cat or the sound cat.
So that is the universal?
That is the universal, because there are many objects of which that sound cat can be said, namely Garfield, Morris, and Felix, and so on.
So for Rosalind, are universals restricted by language?
Yeah, universals are these sounds. He called them puffs of air. In Latin, flatus voces.
In this time period, was Latin still spoken or only written?
Yeah, it's written. I mean, it was used in the church liturgy, so it was spoken to that extent. Flatus voces, like vocalizations. So, yeah, so they're just these sounds that that we produce. So they're very concrete, right? There's no element of abstractness to these things. If you update the view, it could also include inscribed symbols. So then instead of puffs of air, you'd have heaps of chalk. Or whatever. Puffs of air, heaps of chalk, or whatever this stuff is.
Ink?
Bits of marker.
Yeah. Heaps of ink. Heaps? No, it's not really heaps. More like blobs or something. Blobs of ink. Ink blobs. Right? Blobs of ink, heaps of graphite, etc. So that was really the first nominalistic view. And then there was this guy, philosopher, who founded the University of Paris, or at least the philosophy department there, and his name was Abelard. Abelard was a student of Rosselin. So he criticized this view of that universals are mere puffs of air. He argued that some of these puffs of air might not signify anything. They could just be like incoherent, meaningless ramblings, like about Jabberwockies and booze snangles and things like that. So he said, if a universal is just a puff of air, then why aren't those universals? Why isn't there a universal of boo jams? Right? since that's a puff of air, right? So the answer had to be that it's only universal if,
It's about something?
well, if it has a meaning.
Right.
If it's only meaningful puffs of air that, right? It's only meaningful puffs of air that have that would count as universals. Okay, but then what gives them meaning? Concepts or
So it
ideas.
just circles back to this concept.
So it started with nominalism. Started with this strict linguistic view of universals, and it evolved into conceptualism as the more viable form of it because of the problems of meaningless sounds. So does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, so it's hard to sustain nominalism just in the purely linguistic form of, yeah, they're just these pure symbols. Yeah.
And so the strict form of nominalism, how does that get better? So the strict form of nominalism, like the reason it was unlikely, if it was, it's one that wasn't unlikely, is because it tried to establish meaning to all utterances.
Any sounds that come out of your mouth.
So like if you stub your toe and go,
Yeah.
then like, that means that there must be some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if you say some nonsense like slidey toes, boo jam jabberwockies, whatever, right? Then that's got to be represent all these universals too. So that seems wrong. Well, it seems like the thing to say. Yeah. So Abelard said they have to be meaningful sounds, and he then posited concepts as the things which give meaning to these utterances, which led to the conceptualist view. So conceptualism is sort of a more, a little more liberal form of nominalism. The reason it's still nominalistic is that these ideas in the mind are not themselves abstract essences. They're concrete occurrences inside minds, like events or something. They don't seem anything like abstract Platonic essences or even immanent forms because they're not in the things. So your idea of a dog is not something that's in the dog, let alone something that is outside of the world, which dogs partake of or reflect. So, yeah. Okay, shall we move on here? Just enough history of the. Yeah, I mean, there's more that could be said about this, but yeah. Others, there were also hybrid views developed. For example, St. Thomas Aquinas held the view that universals are in the mind. So that sounds like conceptualism, right? But have a basis in things. So what that basis is, right, would need to be teased out. It might be something like similarity, maybe, or something. He says universals are in the mind, which seems like a conceptualistic kind of view, but he brings in the Aristotelian perspective also by saying that there's some basis in the things as well for creating these concepts the way we do. So, yeah, dogness is our mentalistic creation, but it's based on the fact that all these creatures fall into a group somehow. Whereas cats don't fall in that group, they fall into a different group. And how exactly you define that group becomes the question. But maybe it has to do with the similarity somehow between, like all dogs are all more similar to each other than they are to cats, who are more similar to each other than they are to penguins, and so on. Yeah.
So how did that deal with the possibility of someone having thoughts that one would not think come from the outside? Like, for example, if someone was thinking, oh, I think this is a dog,
world or like a perceivable object. Like for example, someone were to have like, we're writing like a fantasy novel.
Like unicorns, you mean?
Yeah,
Dragons?
yeah.
Yeah.
So is it saying that even in those ideas there is something in the perceivable, like physical world that we're getting rid of?
Well, the conceptualists could say that we do have those, that there are those universals. They can say that. The conceptualist can. The Aristotelian wouldn't, because if the thing doesn't exist, the universal is not immanent in anything, right? The Platonist would say that they can exist because they could be those things. What Aquinas would say is not so clear, because he's kind of blending conceptualism and some kind of basis in things as well. So it seems like if they have to have a basis in things, then they wouldn't really be universals. They would just be like imaginary concepts. If you require that that has a basis in things. So, yeah. Okay, so. So this is a thumbnail sketch of universals. History. Okay, so certain arguments were put forward in order to say that conceptualism and nominalism are wrong. Okay, so let's look at some of those. So these here are arguments that could be put forward by some kind of Aristotelian. Yeah.
The Abelard you had up there, that Bronson showed, that wasn't Peter Abelard, was it?
Yeah.
It was Peter Abelard.
He was the guy who got into trouble with Eloise and everything.
Yeah, I'll figure it.
Yeah, he became like he was sort of one of the first like rock stars of philosophy, and
Castrated.
well, yeah, he got like castrated because he was messing around with Eloise, and her family. Then he wrote a book later about his trials and tribulations. Okay, so there are three arguments that could be put for initially that sort of hang together. So there are many arguments in favor of realism, but three sort of form a natural family, and these are known as the formal cause argument. And you may know that Aristotle had 4 causes. Anyone know what those are?
Yeah, efficient, formal.
The efficient cause, the formal cause, right?
Material cause and final cause.
Yeah. Material cause, final cause, efficient cause, and formal cause. Anyone not know what those are? Everyone does know what they are?
Can we go over them?
Yeah, really? Okay.
Big cookies with 4 causes.
You did what?
With Rosenfeld, remember it goes
Oh,
big
we make
cookies.
cookies with
Remember
them, right? Yeah.
the idea of the cookie, the ingredients of the cookie, the purpose of the cookie.
Right.
Yeah, so like a formal cause is an explanation based on the essence or nature of a thing.
Okay.
So like there's a shadow. There's a shadow of a hand on the wall. Why? Because, right?
There's a hand.
Because there's a light source and a hand, and the hand is between the light source and the wall. That's why. And that's due to the essence of what a shadow is, which is that it's a deprivation of light caused by an interposed object. Right? Yeah. That's the formal cause. The efficient cause is a cause that creates something through some kind of change. So a fire is caused in that sense by the striking of a match. Right.
Right, yeah. Okay, so that's the efficient.
Yeah, or a statue is created by the sculpting of the sculptor. The sculptor is the efficient cause of the sculpture, which is the more Aristotelian kind of example. But it seems to apply to the match and the fire, too. Okay. Material cause is like the matter of the thing is the cause. So like, why is this table hard? Because it's made of something like wood or formica, rather than made out of foam rubber. So if the table were made of foam rubber, then we'd explain why the table's soft, because it's made of foam rubber. If the table's hard, we can say it's hard because it's made out of formica. And then the final cause has to do with the thing's function or purpose. So like, why do giraffes have long necks? Because it helps them
Eat leaves.
eat the leaves high up on the branches of the trees. God made them that way. So. Could reach those leaves. Or nature selected their attributes according to their needs, survival needs, and they wound up having long necks for that reason.
Can you close the door? Thank you so much. It's okay.
Yeah, so those were the four causes. The one that's operative here is the formal cause, okay? Okay, so the argument says in premise one that Rover is a dog. Fido is a dog. Spot is a dog, etc. So that's premise one. That seems hard to dispute, right? Unless you're an utter skeptic who doesn't accept anything. We can put them aside, right? Okay, premise two says there must be something about Rover, Fido, Spot, etc., which accounts for all of them being dogs. So it's saying there must be an explanation. It can't just be a brutal fact of the universe that these things are all dogs and like other things just simply aren't, like pencils and beer bottles and chairs. There's got to be something about the beer bottles and the chairs and the pencils, right? Such that those things lack something that Rover, Fido, and Spot have.
Dogmas,
Well, maybe.
maybe.
Something, right?
Necessary property.
Something, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be something. This is all this argument saying there got to be something. And premise three says the best account is that, right? Is that Rover, Fido, Spot, etc. Share a quality in common. Namely, dogness. Therefore, 4, probably dogness does exist. Yeah, so that's the formal cause argument. So this leads us to realism, to a belief in at least moderate realism. This argument. So if we grant premise 1, which premise 1 is acceptable even to nominalists, that Rover, Fido, and Spot are dogs. Premise 2 says there's got to be something about them which accounts for them all being dogs. It seems wrong to suppose that that could just be a brute fact that has no explanation, just an ultimate fact of the universe, that there are dogs, and that they're different than cats and tables, and there's nothing about the more that can be said about it. That doesn't seem right. Does it? No. Yeah, so we get the 3, that the best account is that Rover, Fido, and Spider share a quality in common, namely dogness. So the idea is if Rover has dogness, that means he's a dog. If Fido has dogness, that means he's a dog. If Spot has dogness, that means he's a dog, so that would make them all dogs. So that's how the explanation would go. So the question is, can we come up with some better alternative explanation that doesn't involve abstract shared qualities like dogness, right? So that would make 3 false if we can come up with a better explanation. So the question then becomes, can the nominalist explain this without recourse to dogness, and if so, how? Yeah.
For the conceptualist, I just thought this, if there were no minds, there would be no universals.
Right.
Okay.
So if there were no minds, then it looks like Rover, Fido, and Spot wouldn't be dogs unless they themselves have minds and like realize that they're dogs. But if you take some other example, like puddles of water or whatever, there wouldn't be H2O. There were no minds, right? And H2O doesn't have a mind of its own, even though dogs might have enough of a mind to realize that they're dogs in some sense, right? That they are what they are, apprehended in the dog cognition way, which is maybe different than the way we do it, but just as valid, it would seem. I mean, after all, they are the thing, so they may have a better idea of what they are than we do, who are not them, even though their cognitive apparatus may be a little less sophisticated. It's not that much less sophisticated. They seem to know what they're about in living a dog existence. Right? So, yeah, so, but still that wouldn't help if there were like puddles of water but no minds. Like life on Earth right before the first living organisms began to crystallize out of the random bopping of molecules that was going on. Or before God created or whatever. Of course, one way out is just to suppose that God is always there, and that's usually what conceptualists did. They just posited God as the universal conceiver and then didn't worry about it. Like St. Thomas Aquinas. They all assume that there's a God who's going to be thinking of the water and all these things. But that seems a little too easy. Unless you've got a really strong proof that God exists. But yeah, aside from God, they have a problem, right? With the natures of things when there are not minds there. Anyone have any further thoughts on that?
If you develop a strong proof that God does in fact exist, how does that,
Well, then you can say God conceives all these things even when, God has these ideas of things even when humans or animals may not exist, don't exist.
as long as it's a well-formed proof?
It's got to be a strong proof. Yeah. Not just like, well,
because-
God might exist. But there are all these problems, so we're not really sure.
Omniscient, omnipresent.
You've got to be omniscient,
Right.
is the main thing. You've got to prove an omniscient.
Right.
An omniscient eternal being. Because he's always got to be there too, because if he's not always there, then you might have these cases where like the natures you want to exist don't exist. Yeah. All right, so are there any alternative accounts that can be put forward here that might work? Well, one could be what I'll call the verbal definition theory. So what it says, there's going to be a kind of nominalist theory. So what it says is that Rover is a dog by virtue of meeting the criteria for being a dog, and Fido and Spot likewise. So all you have to do is set out those criteria, and then you can say that they're all dogs because they all meet these criteria. I mean, you don't have to bring in dogness or anything. Okay, so there's going to be a description that's supposed to express the definition of what it is to be a dog, and then that's what you would measure against. Then you don't need dogness. You can say each of them's a dog because it meets this list of adjectives that describe dogs. So, like, suppose the definition of X is a dog if and only if X is a four-legged, furry friend. Okay. So dogs are our four-legged furry friend, and that's the definition. Suppose that's your definition of dog. Then you could just say, well, Rover's a dog because he's a four-legged furry friend. Fido is also, and Spot is also, so there we go. We don't need dogness. We just need to say that each meets the criterion for a dog. Yeah.
So all those parameters taken together, whatever parameters you set for being a dog, can you just say that's dogness? That's what constitutes dogness?
No, only if you put ness after each of those things. Like only if you say four-leggedness, furriness, and friendliness, but we're not saying that. We're nominalists. We're just going to say it's a verbal description, a meaningful verbal description.
What if the dog has an amputated leg?
Yeah, then you get a problem,
He's
right?
not really a dog.
Then you get a problem, right? You got to take your dog to the vet. No, the nominalist has a problem then, right?
Yeah, it's a major problem for the novel.
Yeah, so that would prove that this definition is not a necessary condition.
Right.
It's not necessary because you can have dogs that are three-legged, okay?
Sufficient but not necessary?
It's not necessary. You just showed that. Is it sufficient?
Yeah, I would say so.
No, what if you have like a friendly cat or something? Couldn't it be a four-legged furry friend to somebody?
What if you have an unfriendly dog that's amputated?
Yeah, right. Well, that's just the same example that you gave. Shows that the conditions are not necessary, but they're also not sufficient because a thing that's four-legged, furry, and friendly might be a cat or a squirrel or whatever.
I thought that just made it so that they weren't necessary, but they could still be sufficient.
It's not. It's neither. The definition is neither. So it's a bad definition. You need to revise your definition until you get one that's necessary and sufficient. So it gets longer.
Yeah.
Like how long does it have to get?
Goes
Can anyone define what a dog is in absolute terms? And if we can't, then the theory doesn't work.
just list all the genetic genome combination a dog can have.
Well, we can't do that, right?
No, but that's
Anybody? No.
Off the top of my head?
Well, you may say that's just not fair. That's just a practical problem, but like a biologist could do it. But can a biologist do it? I mean, you want to get down to the genetic code, right? Couldn't that code be subject to some variation? Like some dog was exposed to,
nuclear
it hung around the Chernobyl reactor for too long, and it
like one of those.
it could develop mutations and stuff. Could still be a dog or not. Might be some like new thing. The biologist can't really tell us, right? Definitively when it's not a dog anymore and when it is a dog. Yeah.
So for the top argument, if you're trying to arrive at dogness, could you like list a rigorous set of scientific conditions like the
Yeah, that's what she's trying to do. Yeah.
So you did that.
But they may not be necessary or sufficient either because a dog that's subject to mutations might not meet all of those characteristics.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, could you provoke the nominalist argument at the bottom and then the other one at the top that's trying to get at dogness, right? Could you both try?
Nominalist wants to get rid of dogness.
Yeah.
The realist wants to say you can't get rid of it by defining dog because you can't define dog.
Give a bunch of examples.
Yeah, that won't do it.
Yeah.
That wouldn't explain why they are of the same kind. It would just repeat that they are.
Yeah.
Right? To explain it, you got to give a definition or appeal to some kind of essence of something. Right? Yeah, so it's hard to see how to do it. Plus, there might be some qualities which are simple qualities. Like if you change dog to a color, like red, then you'd have to give so Rover is red, Fido or whatever, right? This shirt is red and this one is. There must be something about these shirts which accounts for all of them being red. The best account is that they all have redness. Okay, so then the verbal definition would have to say X is red if and only if, right?
Which is hard.
Yeah, I mean, how do you say what red is? Well, you might say it's just a brute fact that red things are red. That seems like less implausible than saying it's a brute fact that dogs are dogs, because red's a lot simpler than dog, right? Yeah. Okay. It doesn't seem like it's easy to define. I mean, if you pick out like a wavelength or something and say that red things all reflect such and such a wavelength, the problem is going to be that people can see red in their dreams without being exposed to like any wavelengths, right? So it looks like that doesn't work. On the other hand, but you do have, the nominalist does have the option of saying it's a brute fact that red things are red, and that's not as obnoxious as saying that it's a brute fact that dogs are dogs, because dogs are so much more complex. Obviously, we can explain dogs in terms of further qualities or parts or something. That doesn't seem to be true for red. It's a basic quality.
When you say brute fact, do you mean it's empirical or?
A brute fact is a fact which is inexplicable. It's at the bottom of an explanatory chain such that it can't be explained itself. So it might be, a brute fact is an unexplainable explainer. Something which explains other things, but which itself is so primitive or ultimate or simple that it can't be itself explained by anything deeper.
Can that be used scientifically?
Like electrons. Why do electrons have the properties they do?
Because
It's a brute fact. They just do. That's the nature of things. That would be a possible example. No one seems to be able to come up with a theory that explains why basic particles are the way they are. We just have found out that those are the properties that basic particles have to explain everything else. So unless you have an infinite regress, of explanations. You're going to come to some brute facts at the end of the explaining. Otherwise, you'd go on forever in explaining, which would be fine. Nothing theoretically wrong with never reaching the ultimate explanation. It just seems that in science, so far, the explanations do bottom out. They come to like fundamental particles, which we can't further explain scientifically. But who knows what will happen in the future, right? We may discover we can explain these things, even though we can't explain them now. But there still is this notion of a brute or ultimate fact as an unexplained explainer. It may be that in philosophy and in science there are these unexplained explainers.
Would they be represented as universal laws?
Yeah, they figure in there are universal laws about electrons, and those laws are themselves unexplainable. They can't. Well, they're not a priori. No, they're empirically discovered, but they can't be derived from any other laws. All other laws are derived from them.
And they can't be explained by other laws?
No,
Okay.
not on this picture. Only if you can infinitely go on and on and on, discovering more and more complex explanations, deeper and deeper explanations. But it doesn't seem to be the way it's working out so far. Yeah.
So is this related to Russell's atomic facts? Because the way you describe the very base layer of like a brute, like an brute fact.
Yeah. Russell and Wittgenstein's atomic facts. Yeah, so these basic atomic facts might be either facts about elementary particles or facts about sense data, like red. That was also Wittgenstein's picture in the Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus, if anyone's taking the course on Wittgenstein.
Was that the later?
That's
synopsis?
the earlier.
Of the earlier.
Yeah, he was like working on that when he was fighting in World War I.
Yeah.
Along with Tolkien on the other side, fantasizing about non-existent possible beings. Got to do something to distract yourself when you're in World War I, right? It was bad. Yeah, so it doesn't look like the verbal definition theory is going to be so easy to establish because of two problems: atomic predicates, right? And non-atomic predicates, which we just can't define, like dog. We can't strictly define them. It seems like most predicates fall in that category. I mean, it's very difficult to define lots of things, largely because they're open texture or vague, as Wittgenstein would put it. So you can't come up with a precise set of necessary and sufficient conditions. That's bad for the nominalist, given this argument. All right, so that theory is no good. Then there's the causal theory. So the causal theory tries to give an efficient cause of why things are all the same, of the same kind. That's the causal theory. There's another alternative theory to the shared property view. Causal, I call it the causal theory. So it says that Rover's a dog because his parents were dogs, and it's passed down. Like comes from like. So if your parents are dogs, then that's going to explain why you're a dog, because they don't give birth to worms or hippopotamuses. They only give birth to dogs, right?
But there's some things that don't causally follow. Like,
Yeah, I'm just saying in this case you can say
okay.
Rover and Spot. Rover's a dog because both of his parents were dogs.
Right.
And Spot, the same story, and also Fido, same thing. So each of them has a lineage, right, which explains their membership in the species of dog, and common lineage, right? With that same lineage, causally, you belong to the same kind. So causal theory says each came from dog parents, each was begotten by dogs, and like comes from like, so that's going to make them dogs. Each of them had dogs as parents. And like comes from like. So that's the causal explanation. So it seems like we only need concrete things for that. Don't need to bring in any kind of abstract dogness or anything.
It's tied to how Aristotle used to say that like comes from like, and that's when he started like making the phylogenetic tree to organize things.
Yeah,
I'm just asking if this
Yeah.
borrows from that.
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So, anything questionable about this explanation? Yeah.
Yeah, like
What?
wolves and dogs. Seems like there's a certain point at which perhaps there's a dog with non-dog parents, or yeah, and it doesn't account for the possibility of change.
Mutation.
Yeah.
That would be more than one story, probably. I imagine some dogs might interbreed with them.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they definitely can.
But
at a certain point there,
mule,
you'll-
donkey, horse kind of thing. They're like, yeah, mules
Think
are-
of like a mule.
parents are donkey and a horse, right? Yeah.
It also doesn't apply with everything with parents. Like, the dog's parent could be a male dog and a female dog, but the offspring is not both a male and a female. It doesn't get that from them, it just gets the dog.
Mhm.
So like, why did it just get the dog?
No, because the male and female accounts for the line external from it. So you are going to get that from either or.
But not
That's
like
still
the,
inherited. Think about it.
And also, how does this deal with, how does also deal with like plants? Like say like plants that are able to like, they're able to interbreed, I think like hybridization or whatever, where you have.
Well, some plants have sexual reproduction and some have asexual reproduction. So the ones that have sexual reproduction would be the same as dog case. The ones that have asexual reproduction just come from one thing that's, right? So they come, their parent, right,
Just themselves.
was a rhododendron bush, whatever, so, right?
Yeah.
They are too. Like comes from like, so. If they had parents, like sexual reproduction, like the bees carry the pollen, then it's going to be like this case. So you either have one parent or two parents that belong to the same species producing offspring that belong to the same species. Right.
what about pollinators?
Yeah, it would be the same. But I do think you run into a problem with like the first dog.
Yeah, regret. Where did the first?
Well, it looks like you get like that there have to be an infinite regression of dogs for this to work.
Right.
Because otherwise you have a first dog, and if you have a first dog, it did not come from parents that were dogs, since by hypothesis it's the first dog. On the other hand, if you don't have a first dog, you have an infinite regressive dogs, and that seems really implausible. The infinite dog theory is like not one that you can confirm, right? That dogs go back infinitely with no first member of the class. But if there is a first member of the class, it didn't come from, right? Unless you follow some ancient Egyptian like religion, which says that there were like dog gods that created them.
Dog guy.
Yeah,
Egyptians would be cats, though.
Yeah, well, they had both.
They had dogs.
They had dogs, cats, alligators, they had they were polytheists, and they
That's true.
tended to embody their gods and animals for some reason.
Or was it for them the other way around?
Yeah, right, they thought of their gods as having like animal essences, like alligators and dogs and cats.
From a cross-cultural perspective, it seems that like some cultures take that the gods made the forms of the animal, or the gods were the form of the animal.
Yeah. Yeah, but according to this theory, you'd actually have to have like a dog god who necessarily eternally exists. That doesn't seem right.
To prevent eternal regret.
Otherwise, you get an infinite regress. So this causal theory is like not good, right? For that reason. So neither the causal theory nor the verbal definition theory work. So the only one left standing is the dogness theory so far, right? Anyone have a better theory?
I like the verbal definition theory for like practical everyday use. It seems, you know, kind of like if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, probably a duck. But I don't think, yeah, it kind of goes as far as you said.
Trouble is you can't actually
Yeah.
produce. Can't actually define it. So it sort of falls apart.
With Plato, could you not say the form of a dog was eternal, and therefore the spirit of the dog became the dog?
Before the dog was into being.
Yeah, Plato doesn't think that dogs have spirits.
Oh.
Only humans have a mortal soul. But we still have many inanimate objects that we could use instead of dogs in the argument. So we could ask, you know, what makes all of these things copper? Right. This is a piece of copper, this is a piece of copper, that's a piece of copper, right? We can't say that all these pieces of copper came from other pieces of copper. And where did all these pieces of copper come from? Infinitely. Well, no, actually, copper was formed at a certain time in stars, in the evolution of the physical universe. Yeah, it didn't always exist. Before that, there was an age in which only like quarks existed, right? Copper didn't come along until you had like the death of stars. Yeah.
Wouldn't the verbal definition theory work better for more, less complicated things like a piece of copper? You can probably make reference to,
No.
not even for,
No. You can't precisely define even those things because there are isotopes and it becomes very difficult to precisely define any of these natural kinds. But maybe you can. It's an open question. It's not as simple as we can just define what copper is because there are all these alternative versions of copper and stuff. And so open texturedness creeps in. So certainly it's a little better than the biological case, right? Because it seems that biological species really aren't aren't genuine natural kinds. They rely a lot on lineage and history, whereas copper and those things are more based on pure structure. But like I say, there are innumerable isotopes of copper that are possible, all of which structurally differ. And so it would get a bit tricky, but maybe you could do it for them. So, but overall, right, it's got to work for all the cases, right? Not just for elements in the periodic table, but also for living things and for tables and for different kinds of objects that we want to talk about. And certainly for things like colors, where it's really difficult to come up with a definition of what an individual particular color is.
And numbers.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, so that's one of the arguments there. Now, there's a fourth theory that's going to be a lot more successful than these first couple of ones. It's known as resemblance nominalism. It posits the existence of concrete qualities. So it's not purely nominalistic in the sense of it just believes in bodies or something like that, like Rosalind thought. So it's not what you might call austere nominalism. It's like what's the opposite of austerity? It's a kind of very rich nominalistic theory. It says that among the concrete things in the world are not only bodies, but their particular features, which, according to resemblance nominalism, are known as tropes, T-R-O-P-E-S. So here's the idea. If you take this marker here, according to the resemblance nominalist, it has a special quality, which is this particular whiteness, which no other object in the universe has, even if it's exactly the same shade of white as this. It won't be this whiteness because this whiteness is only had by this thing. It's that one there. And it's also got a particular shape which only this thing has and which no other thing can have. Even if it has exactly the same shape, universally speaking, it still has a different shape in the sense that it's got the shape that's located at these space-time coordinates. And the other marker with exactly the same qualitative shape, it's got that shape, that particular shape at a different set of coordinates. So they're different particulars. So according to this theory, there are all these tropes running around the universe. So all these things are particulars rather than universals. But for every thing that you thought was a universal, there's going to be a whole bunch of corresponding particulars, which you might call particularized qualities, which is what these tropes are. So if you bring those in, then you may have an explanation. Tropes as particularized qualities. So we're out of time, so I'm just going to say the basic idea is that Rover has his own particular dogness, and Fido has a particular dogness, and Spot has a particular dogness. And these particular dognesses resemble each other. And so that's what makes them all dogs, is that they have particular dognesses which form a circle of resemblance, such that Rover's dogness resembles Fido's, resembles Spot's, which resembles Rover's. So there's a circle, complete circle of resemblance among all the particular dognesses that exist. And that's what explains why they're all dogs, because they have particular qualities which form a circle of resemblance. So on that note, I'm going to stop and we'll have a closer look at this theory and critique it next time.